friends and book lovers, welcome. As the title would suggest, this video is a review on a much anticipated release, The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. Now, for me, this has been a very anticipated release of the year, and I was really excited to get an arc of this from NetGalley. It was totally, I think, more last minute. I got one in like May, and even though I wanted to finish this in May, I only just finished it recently, so near the beginning of June. This is the first in her new series, and that series is called The Burning Kingdoms. I'm not sure if it's going to be a trilogy or a longer series or even a duology, but either way, there's going to be another book released for this series. So this is another epic fantasy which is inspired by the settings and epics of India. This follows a captive and prisoned princess and a maid servant who have forbidden magic, and they band together to save their empire from like the Dark Emperor, who happens to be the princess's brother, and that kind of gets our story going. It's said that this is gonna be a series for people that really love City of Brass and that really loved Poppy War. I haven't read Poppy War, but I really do love City of Brass, so I was excited to hear that those are kind of maybe settings. If you enjoyed those, you might enjoy Jasmine Throne. I will say that Jasmine Throne is definitely darker than City of Brass, much darker. I'm not sure how Poppy War compares. I've heard Poppy War being described as grimdark, so it might be that Poppy War is even darker than Jasmine Throne, but there is a difference there, and it's not as like lighthearted or expansive. This journey in Jasmine Throne is quite dangerous and quite almost like scary, but not in a horror way, but just in like a, oh my gosh, that sounds like crazy and a little horrible kind of way. It is really interesting and really vividly done. So if you've watched my reviews before, I rate on 5 different criteria. One is the writing style, the world building, the plot, the characters, and then finally just how much I enjoy it. So for this one, I'm gonna start off with the writing style, which is what I usually start off with, because for me, the writing style can definitely make or break a novel. If I like the writing style, it just keeps me in the novel for longer. If I can't stand the writing style, it's probably going to be an author that I won't be able to read from. This is my first Tasha Suri book, and I'm happy to say that I really do enjoy her writing style. It's not my absolute favorite, but I do love how descriptive she is. I like how easy to understand I felt her books were, but then she had some vocabulary and some wording and way she phrased her sentences and dialogue that really gave an atmospheric effect and made it a very immersive world, and so I really enjoyed that about her. I think that she's very descriptive, but not too flowery and too over the top, just enough that it creates a really beautiful atmosphere. And so I felt like this novel was very dark and atmospheric, and her writing played a really big role in keeping it that way. She also describes things in a really rich manner. So the culture is really rich, the environment is really rich, everything is really lush, the dialogue is very rich, it's very passionate, there's a lot of emotion behind it, and it's really well conveyed in the page as you're physically reading it. I didn't read this on audio, so I can't say if the narrator had a passionate voice and was able to express these things to the same ability that Tasha Suri's writing was, but the way her writing was so expressive, it just made it feel so rich and lush, and that is something that I really enjoyed about her writing, and something that I will look forward to in the next book in this series, and also in her other duology, which I have yet to read. So while we're talking about writing style, I feel that world building ties in really nicely, because the writing style does lend itself to a really beautiful world building. Again, everything was really lush, everything was really descriptive, everything was really rich, and it was really easy to immerse yourself in the world because of the writing style, and the world building were so intricately and complexly done. This is not like a simple world. It seems and it feels very complex, and it feels very dark. We're in a dark period for this world, and there is an empire needing of saving because there is an emperor that is very strict and a bit fanatic in his religious practices. So it was definitely described that way, and the way the world was described was definitely very dark. I would be intrigued to see in the next books in the series, if it's one or if it's multiple, if with the way things would change in the world, if the tone of the writing will change as well, because then that would lend itself to like, I think, an absolute mastermind when it comes to creating atmospheres and world buildings, and that is something that I'm really intrigued to see and kind of wonder if she does that in her other books as well. So if you guys are familiar with other writings or her other books, let me know if she does change her tone or if it does become atmospheric in a different manner when there are different elements that change within the story. I do have one qualm with the world building, and that would be the magic system itself. I still, after reading the novel in its entirety, don't understand 100% how it works. I will say that later on in the novel, a lot of things did get revealed about how the magic works, how you're able to access the magic, how the affinity to the magic works, what it's tied to, etc. Later on in the novel, that's better explained, but I still feel like I didn't get a full understanding or a very coherent understanding of the magic system itself, which is a really big part of the world, of course. I didn't really understand exactly how things are done and why they are the way they are. I think that there's that bit of folklore and the rest of the loose ends to tie up when it comes to explaining how the magic system works and how people come about to gain this magic and to access it more fully, and then to level up as well, because there is leveling up of magic in this novel. I do hope that the second in the series or the next novel in the series is going to help explain a lot more, and we're going to get to really explore the magic in that novel. I think this one was more about the saving of the empire and less about exactly how the magic gets done, at least in my opinion. After reading certain books like the Brandon Sanderson Final Empire book, where everything in the magic system is so well explained to like minute detail, I kind of want to know a little bit more. Even if it's not to that detail, I still felt like there was a little bit lacking in this one. It is mysterious and it is dark, so there is that, and it's very intriguing, but I think because I'm so intrigued, I just really want to learn more. So that's one thing that I would really want more of and hope to get more of in the second novel. The next thing was the plot itself, and I am not specifically a plot-driven reader. I think I'm both character-driven and plot-driven, and especially depending on the story itself. I will say that the plot for me was a little slow. I felt like in the first like 20, 25, 30%, things weren't moving very fast, and I wasn't really sure where the story was going. Even though I had the synopsis, I wasn't really sure how things were going to work out. At about 40-ish% is when I started to really understand how things were going to unfold. I got to a level where things were moving quickly, things were moving forward. There was items happening and you could just see how things were coming together. But for the first like 30, maybe 40%, it moved very slow for me. And that was something that I was surprised about, because I kind of figured it would be a faster paced novel since we had a lot of saving of the empire to do, etc., and getting the princess and the maidservant together. But that's not how it moved. It moved a lot slower than I thought. And then it got jam-packed in the second half of the novel, so that was all really exciting. And that really made the book so much more interesting and fun and fast-paced for me. And this does happen to me a lot in first novels in a series. Sometimes I'll find them a little slow because everything is getting built. The setting is getting set. We're learning about the characters, what they're like, what their values are, what's important to them, and how they interact with the world, and sometimes that can take a long time. So I think if I enjoy the next few books in the series, I won't mind that this first one was slow. It's just that I wanted things to move. I was just so curious about how things were gonna happen that it just felt slow for me, especially after reading more fast-paced books before this one. But like I said, that happens to me a lot in first novels. So sometimes this can be something that is just like a first in a series syndrome rather than something that's actually wrong with the novel. I, however, am picky and would have preferred a faster paced beginning than having things take off at 40%. But there are other books that I really love that don't really take off until about 50%. So I'm gonna give it to her that this was really well done. It is very complex. The plot is pretty complex with a lot of different things, different elements being pulled in, kind of little subplots being pulled in. And I will mention that this is multiple perspectives, so lots of different point of views, which can be a little confusing. It's not as many at first, you only get a couple, and then the point of views build and build towards the end of the story where you kind of know who the characters are. So it's not super confusing to be reading all these different point of views. There are other books that have a lot of different point of views, and those are very difficult to get used to, but I didn't think that this was one of them when I was reading the actual story. So the next point is the characters, and I have to say, I think this is where she excels, the author excels, and the story excels, is the characters, their complexity, and the relationship among the characters as well. I have to say, I really enjoyed how complex her characters were. A lot of them were torn between doing the right thing and the wrong thing, there were so many gray areas that the characters had to deal with in all of their decision making and all of their planning, and it was so refreshing to see that in a character because they felt so real. That's just exactly how I go through life. You know, decisions aren't always black and white. A lot of things are really difficult and a lot of things are in a gray area, and I think that here in the novel, the characters, the way that they're complex, the way that they think, the way that they decide things, the way that they view the world, and they all have their own ideals and values, and they all make sense from their own perspective, was really well done. Probably one of the most well done attempts on character complexity that I have read, at least maybe this year, and I was so incredibly impressed by that. The characters felt real, they felt relatable, they felt like people I could know or people that I could spend time with and begin to understand. They just felt like real people. I felt like I was with them in the world, and I felt like I could understand what they're going through, and I could see all their different perspectives, and I can sympathize with all of them, and that was just really great and refreshing and something that brought a lot of excitement to me while I was reading it. I also want to say that there is a sapphic romance in this novel, and while that's not at the forefront, it still exists as like a subplot. And in terms of relationships, I don't just mean romantic relationships. She does all of the relationships really well, like familial relationships, friend relationships, platonic ones, romantic ones, authoritative relationships. Everything is done so well. We have the princess in the story too, who's really good at manipulating the world around her and getting people to do things for her, and seeing how she builds those relationships and how she gets into the good graces of all the people around her to get all the things that she needs done is just so expertly woven, and that in itself is really great as well. So characters and relationships I think are amazing, and I think I would read her work just to get a beautiful character-driven story out of it. If you are a character-driven reader, I think you might really enjoy this book, because that is the best part of this book, is really the characters and the relationships, and that fuels the plot. It's very political in that way, and that is really interesting to read all the different interactions and all the different ways the characters react to each other as well. So the last couple things are enjoyability and rating. So I think I'm going to rate this 4 stars, which is still a really high rating. I think because of the world building and the slowness of the plot, I'm being really picky there, but I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars just because I wish that there was a little more. The characters, the writing, and some of the other world building aspects are just marvelous. So atmospheric, so complex, so well done, and I really enjoyed reading it. I do wish that I would have pushed through a little faster in the beginning. I think because it was a little slow, it took me a little longer to read and longer to get this review out, but I will be continuing on with the series. I will be reading the other works that she has written, and I'm really excited to see what else she has in store for us in this particular world, and with her duology that I still haven't read, which I hear amazing things about. If you guys have read this book, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it, if you agreed, if you disagree with any of the points that I'm making, and if you haven't read the book, let me know if you plan on reading it and what parts of it really intrigue you when you get to it. If you enjoyed this video, please click that like button. That does help me out a lot. And if you like this content and you want to see more from me, please don't hesitate to subscribe.